The School at the Chalet, Chapter 20, and still more. The juniors having begun to play pranks, all it must be admitted of fairly harmless character, found it too pleasant a pastime to give up. The night after the affair of the French chalk piano keys, Juliet, on going to bed, barely suppressed a wild yell when she entered her cubicle, for there, sitting up in her bed, was a figure that looked curiously lifelike in the half-light. A closer inspection informed her that the creature was made of her own pillow, decked in her own pajama jacket, with a boudoir cap hastily manufactured out of 2 handkerchiefs stuck on top, while beneath this an admirably smiling face, drawn in colored chalk on a sheet of white paper, made the thing natural enough to have scared her badly for the moment. Grasping the ridiculous object, she marched into the cubicle where Joey Bettany, who had caught the extraordinary sound she had made, was choking her laughter with the sheet. "Joey," said Juliet indignantly, "did you do this?" I... Joey was incapable of uttering more at that moment. The sight of the weird object completely upset her. Dropping it, Juliet took her by the shoulders and shook her. "Joey, stop giggling and tell me if you were so stupid." "Well, stop shaking me then," reported Joey, who, as well as she could for lack of breath, was saying. "You deserve more than shaking, you little horror," declared Juliet, releasing her as she spoke. "If anyone hears you, there'll be a row," said Joey calmly. "It's lights out for me, and you're not supposed to talk to me now." Juliet was rendered speechless by her virtuous air, but she soon recovered herself. "Well, upon my word," she said, "for cool cheek, that beats everything. It would serve you right if I took this thing to Madame." "You wouldn't, though," returned Joey with confidence. She was leaning back against her pillow, smiling up at the older girl as she spoke. Juliet suddenly laughed at her. "No, you're right. I won't. But be careful, my child. I'll have my revenge, so don't you forget." "I won't," replied Jo cheerfully. "What? Must you go? So sorry. Good night." She turned over on her side and snuggled down, and Juliet, with rather a grim smile, left her. All the time she was preparing for bed, she was turning ideas over in her mind. Just as she was kneeling down to say her prayers, a smothered shriek from Grizel brought her to her feet with a bound. "Grizel, what on earth's the matter? Are you hurt? Oh!" "Those little beasts!" spluttered Grizel as she drew her curtain back. "Look at that! 2 brushes in my bed." She held them out as she spoke. "Little horrors," laughed Juliet. "I had an effigy in mine." "They must have gone mad," declared Grizel. "It's all Joey, of course. She thinks of these things, even if she doesn't do them." "She does not," said the third voice indignantly. "'Twas me did that." "Girls, what are you thinking of? Juliet, Grizel, why are you not in bed?" They all jumped as the outer curtains parted to show Miss Bettany. "Why are you not in bed?" she repeated. "And why have you drawn back the curtains between your cubicles? Juliet and Grizel, you know it's against the rules." Silence answered her. On hearing her voice, Grizel had dropped the brushes, so she did not see them, and no one seemed to have an answer ready. She bade the 2 seniors hurry to bed. "I will see you in the morning," she said coldly. "I am very disappointed in both of you. I thought you could be trusted to keep the rules." With this she left the room, while 2 unhappy people stared at each other. Then Grizel drew the curtain again and retired to her bed. After she had pushed the brushes underneath it, Juliet followed suit, and a deadly silence filled the room. It continued next morning, and when Grizel met Simone on the stairs, she drew to one side. Simone lifted her dark eyes to the senior's face with the glimmer of a smile, but Grizel tilted her head and stalked downstairs with an offended dignity that was rather marred by her missing the last step and staggering somewhat ignominiously across the hall. "Grisel is furious," reported Simone to the others. "She would not regard me." "If you mean look at, I'd say so," murmured Joey. "When are you going to my sister to say it's your fault?" Simone's eyes fell, and she began to play nervously with the end of her girdle. I don't know," she stammered. "Why not? I should go after breakfast and get it over with." "Yes." Joey turned and looked at her incredulously. "You surely don't mean you're going to funk it?" she demanded. No, of course not. I'll go." Will Madame be very angry?" "Couldn't say." "Shouldn't think so," was the laconic response. "Oh, Joey, do not be angry with me," pleaded Simone, half crying. "I will go certainly, and say it was my fault." "Right-o," said Joey. "Come on to breakfast. There's the bell." Simone would have made only a poor breakfast had Joey not kept a watchful eye on her. As it was, she was persuaded to eat her usual meal, and then Joey went with her as far as the study door. "Buck up, old thing," she said cheerfully. "She can't eat you, and I'll wait for you here." Thus adjured, Simone went in after tapping at the door. Miss Bethany looked up in surprise when she saw her. She had been expecting Grisel and Juliet. "Well, Simone," she said, "what is it?" "Please, madame, I am come to say that it was my fault," said Simone. "Your fault? What is your fault? I don't understand." Simone took hold of her rapidly departing courage with both hands and said, The disturbance last night, I did it." "You did it? But it had nothing to do with you." "Yes, madame. I had put 2 brushes in Grisel's bed." For a moment Madge's lips twitched. Simone's expression was so serious. Then she pulled herself together. "That was very silly," she said gravely. "Yes, madame, I know it was," agreed Simone. "But you will forgive them, since the fault is to me." "The fault is mine," corrected her headmistress. "I will see Grisel and Juliet, Simone. And please don't do such a silly thing again. Run away now." Greatly relieved, Simone trotted off, and in a minute or so later Grisel and Juliet presented themselves, inwardly quaking a little. They met with an agreeable surprise. "Simone has been to me," said Miss Bethany soberly, "and she tells me that it was her fault that there was a disturbance in the dormitory last night, so we will say no more about it. But remember that for the future, even brushes in your bed will not be acceptable as an excuse for breaking rules. You may go now." "Jolly good for Simone," said Grisel. "I didn't think she had it in her." The next joke was a harmless one, but which had far-reaching consequences. 2 days after Simone's confession, Joey and Grisel came up to Gisela and solemnly informed her that on the 15th of July, which was St. Swithin's Day, it was the custom in all good English schools to sip a cup of water, which was passed round, and wish as one did so. "But first you must take it to any foreign mistress in the school," said Grisel impressively, meaning, of course, that the water should be offered to mademoiselle. As the 2 practical jokers had already played tricks of similar nature on her, Grisel looked at them sharply. Neither had the ghost of a smile on her face, and Joey's expression was superangelic, a bad sign, which her sister would have recognized at once. Gisela, however, was not so experienced, and she was completely taken in. "The 15th? That is tomorrow," she said seriously. "I will remember." "What a lark! Didn't think she'd be had so easily," chuckled Joey. "Neither did I," replied Grisel. "Shan't we crow over them tomorrow?" Unfortunately, Gisela had misinterpreted one part of Grisel's speech. In her eyes, of course, all 3 mistresses were foreigners, and both Joey and Grisel were thunderstruck when just before prayers the head girl advanced to the little dais where the staff was, and offering the cup of water, murmured in her pretty English, "The cup of water for a wish, as is the custom in all English schools on St. Swithin's Day. There was a moment's silence. Miss Bethany looked puzzled. Miss Maynard choked audibly, and Mademoiselle wore an outraged expression. Then the head-mistress, with one rapid glance round the room, took in the affair at once. Quietly she accepted the cup and drank from it. "Thank you, Gisela," she said, as she returned it. "And now we will all have a prayer." The ensuing events were lost on Joey and Grizel, who were almost petrified with horror. They were more horrified when, after she had given out the notices for the day, Miss Bethany added, "I should like to see Josephine and Grizel in my study now before lessons." Then she dismissed the school and went to her own room. The culprits presently appeared. "Now," she said, "I want to know what Gisela meant." It was only a lark," mumbled Joey at last. "Please speak correct English, Josephine. Repeat your sentence." It was only a joke," repeated her small sister rather faintly. Miss Bethany's eyebrows went up at that statement. "A joke. I'm afraid your sense of fun is too elemental to appeal to me. I see nothing humorous in a silly trick like that. Who suggested it?" Joey went scarlet. Grizel hung her head and said nothing. Truth to tell, she was rather scared. She had never encountered her head-mistress in this mood. "Who suggested it?" repeated Miss Bethany in a voice that intimated that she meant to know sooner or later. "It was me," said Grizel at last, as sulkily as she dared. "Indeed? Your grammar seems to stand in as much need of correction as your idea of humour. Well, I am going to send for Gisela, and you will both apologize to her before me for your silly impertinence towards her." She rang her little bell as she spoke, and presently Marie appeared and was dispatched for Gisela. Presently Gisela appeared, wearing a rather startled expression. "You have sent for me, madame?" she said. "Yes, Gisela. Josephine and Grizel wish to express their regret for being impertinent enough to play a silly trick on you about St. Swithin's Day observances." Gisela's face cleared at that. "But it is all right," she said. "I knew when I had offered you the water that it was a take-in." "Nevertheless, it was very impertinent of them," replied Miss Bethany. "Girls?" "I'm sorry," said Joey. "I suppose it was cheek, Gisela, but I didn't think of it. Honest Injun." "It is all right," repeated Gisela. "Now, Grizel," said the head-mistress. "I'm sorry," mumbled Grizel. After dismissing the head girl, Miss Bethany had said a few more words on practical joking, and then sent them to their form rooms, where Jo, at any rate, was soon immersed in her history. Not so Grizel. She was intensely proud and hated apologizing to anyone. Besides this, her head-mistress' strictures on her sense of humour had offended her dreadfully. She sulked till halfway through the morning. Then the sudden memory of a joke she had once heard of as being played on a master at her cousin's school came to her. "I'll do that," she thought. "Perhaps that may not seem kiddish. At any rate, it'll do something to rag me for. That idiot of a Gisela." The joke in question required careful preparation, and Grizel was rather doubtful as to whether she could get the materials she required. Fortune, however, favoured her. On the landing near the big dormitory stood an old armoire in which Mademoiselle kept such simple medicines as they were likely to need. As a rule, it was kept locked, but Amy had fallen down and bumped her head, so Mademoiselle went to fetch some cold cream for the lump. She left the cupboard open, and Grizel passed at the time, saw her chance, and took it. The fun started next morning when Mademoiselle came to give B Division their German lesson. Both Grizel and Jo came for this. Jo's German was fluent enough, but her written composition was weak, so Madge had ordained that she must attend the lesson of B Division as well as those of A. Happy-go-lucky Joe accepted the lot quite calmly, and rejoiced in the fact that, at any rate, she was missing hated geometry, and might have been much worse off. The first half of the lesson was devoted to the correction of a previous composition. Then Mademoiselle turned to the blackboard. We will now do some oral composition, she said in German. I will write the title on the board, and then we will all make sentences. We will today talk of the mountains. Margia, give me the German for the mountains. Gebirge, said Margia promptly. The article, said Mademoiselle, waiting chalk in hand. Oh, I think, said Margia, somewhat doubtful this time. Mademoiselle beamed approval on her, and turned to write it up. In vain she struggled with the chalk. Not one mark could she make. I do not understand, she said, lapsing into her own language in the stress of the moment. Perhaps the chalk is wet, suggested Joey. If it is, it doesn't write, I know. Perhaps that is the reason, agreed Mademoiselle, looking at the chalk dubiously. Margia, go to the stationery cupboard and fetch for me a fresh piece, if you please. There is no more in the desk. Margia darted away and presently returned with a new stick. But for all the impression it made, she might just as well have never fetched it. But this is an extraordinary occurrence, Mademoiselle was beginning, when the door opened and the head-mistress entered, white with anger. Mademoiselle was too full of the unusual behavior of the chalk to notice anything wrong. Madame, she began eagerly, the chalk will not write. I know, said her head in low tones. She advanced to the board and drew her hand down it in one sweep. Then she looked at her palm. As I thought, she said. Which of you has Vaselined all the chalkboards? There was a deathly silence. Everyone was staring with fascinated eyes at the head-mistress, whom they seemed to be seeing for the first time. Miss Bettany suddenly struck the desk with her hand. Everyone jumped. Who did it? She demanded. Is there a coward in the school? On that word, Griselle sprang to her feet, head up, eyes blazing defiance. I did it, she said, as insolently as she dared. I. Hush! There was then in the one word which checked the rush of speech to her lips. You say you did it, Griselle Cochran. Yes. Go to your room, said Miss Bettany quietly, and wait there till I come to you. I am ashamed to think a girl I had counted as a senior should cause so much trouble by her childishness and impertinence. Go at once. Griselle went. Chapter 21. Plans. Judgment had gone forth. Griselle was to be left severely alone by the rest of the school. No one was to speak to her, and she was to speak to nobody. She was to sit by herself in classes, and her meals would be brought to her in the schoolroom. When the others were at games, she was to go for a walk with whichever member of the staff could take her. This was to last for 2 days, and it was the severest punishment that had ever been given at the Chalet school. In vain did Joey plead that the fault was largely hers, since it was she who had suggested that it would be a pity to let the term go by without some practical jokes. In vain did Mademoiselle, who was fond of the troublesome child, appeal against the sentence. Not even could Gisela, speaking for the school, avail anything. Miss Bettany had made up her mind that punished Griselle was going to be, and nothing could save her. In the interview she had had with the girl, Griselle had proved herself defiant in the extreme. She possessed a temper which, once aroused, took some time to cool off. She had hated having to apologize to Gisela the day before, and the two affairs together had roused all the worst in her. Finally Miss Bettany had given up trying to make her see reason, had named her punishment, and left her to herself, hoping that a little solitude would bring her to her senses. "Oh, dear," sighed Joey in her lunch hour, when they were all wandering about doing nothing in particular. "I wish I'd never heard of the word joke." "Is Madame very angry?" asked Gisela. slipping an arm through hers. "She's rather mad," acknowledged Joey. "I think Grizel cheeked her." She threw a wistful glance at the window of the little room where Gisela was presumably confined. Then, turning to the other girl, she went on, "Grizel's got such a beast of a temper. When she gets her monkey up, she doesn't much care what she does." "Gets her monkey up," repeated Gisela with a puzzled frown. "I do not understand." "Sorry, that's a slang, I'm afraid," apologized Joey. "Loses her temper, you know." "Your English slang is so incomprehensible," complained the head girl. "Yes, I suppose it is, but it's jolly expressive. Hello, here's the postman. He's late today." "Grüß Gott, Herr Schneider." The postman returned her greeting amiably, handed her the letters, and departed. "One from Dick, that's my brother, for Madame," commented Joey. "Two from Marnie, and one for Mardia and Amy. None for me. What a swizz." "There's the bell for lunch," said Gisela. "Come on, let us go in." They went in, Joey leaving the Troyline in order to take the letters to her sister. Madge was standing by the window, her lips set and her eyes thoughtful. "Hello," she said, when she saw her small sister. "What is it?" "Oh, letters." "Letter from Dick," said Joey, "and it's lunch." Madge's face relaxed as she took the letters. "All right, you come here after, and we'll read it together. Take the others to the owners, will you?" Lunch seemed never-ending to Joey. She bolted her own food, and when Simone accepted a second helping, cast a look of deep reproach at her. However, everything comes to an end sooner or later, and at last they all rose, and grace was said. To Madge, 2 minutes later, appeared a flushed and excited Joey, who could scarcely be induced to sit down. "Buck up and get on, do," she urged. "I'm dying to hear what Dick says." Madge laughed. "Here goes, then," she said, as she smoothed out the thin foreign paper. "Dear kids," Dick had written, "thanks awfully for your last letters, though it took me all my time to read Joey's. What on earth was she wrote with a suppose she knew? Some of the words looked as though a good-sized black beetle had fallen into the ink-pot and then staggered about on the paper. They don't seem to teach the young to write nowadays." "Cheek!" interjected Joey swiftly. "He needn't talk. His own fist's bad enough for anything. I'm glad the school's going so well, but my dear kid, have nothing to do with Carrick. He's an awfully bad hat. They do say that he was practically kicked out of here. Had made the place too hot to hold him. But it's only gossip so far, and there may be no foundation for it. All the same, a chap from the hills told me that he'd sent that unfortunate kid of theirs to the same school up there, and then tried to clear out and leave her on the head's hands. Luckily, the old lady contrived to track them, and they were obliged to stump up what they owed and take the girl with them. One's awfully sorry for her. She seems to have a rotten time for all I can gather. Mrs. C. has a vile temper, and they say he isn't much better. It's an awful life for a girl to go dragging about like that. If Carrick wants you to have Juliet, isn't that her name? As a boarder, don't you do it. I wish to goodness you had someone more reliable to look after you than Mademoiselle La Potre. I know she's a jolly good sort, but women are so helpless they ought to have a man to look after them. I'm awfully glad that the little pickaninny is going strong and fat. Austria seems to suit her. That cinema stunt was rather cheek, I thought. I'm thankful it got no further. I certainly don't want my sister stuck up in every cinema for an idiot to see. There's precious little news to tell you. We are busy with some experiments at present. The gobbler, Dick's superior, has some wild notion of growing European fruit trees here, so we're mucking about in a fair-sized clearing, growing good old plums and apples. This, of course, is an addition to our ordinary work. I blessed him the other day, I can tell you. He had us pruning the planting the whole day, and the Mercury doing the high jumps for all it was worth. The rains are going well, and there's a chorus of frogs outside my bungalow at the moment. This is a beastly weather. The one consolation is that anyhow the snakes are laying pretty low. My bearer caught a whacker the other night, a king cobra, so he's induced a mongoose to the household in case the mate is anywhere round. We've called the little lad Benjamin, after Stalky's Benjamin, remember? Well, there's nothing more to tell you, and I'm dead tired and just going to turn in when I finish this scrawl. Remember what I say and leave Carrick alone. Salam's Dick. There was a little silence when Madge had finished, then Joey broke it. Dick's too late, she said. We've been and gone and done it, poor Juliet. Poor Juliet, indeed, sighed Madge. Oh, Joey Bettany, we've got a lot to be thankful for, let me tell you. I know, said Joey soberly. You're a sport to me, Madge, and Dick's another. We're all you've got, said Madge briefly. Some people haven't as much, replied Joey, leaning her head against her sister. Look at Juliet, and then Griselle hasn't anyone much. You can't say her father's up to much, can you? Poor old Griselle. Madge slipped an arm round her little sister. You're right there, old lady. But Griselle must come into line with the rest of you. You're up to monkey tricks as well, I know, but you haven't been impertinent, too. I know you think I'm being a perfect beast to her, but she can't be left to go on like that, can she? Joey acknowledged the truth of this. No, I see your point, but Madge, old thing, I do think she's sorry by this time. Can't you go and see? Madge shook her head. No, Joey, she won't be sorry yet. Now, it's time for prep, and you must toddle off. Come along early tomorrow morning, and we'll have a palaver. It's only a fortnight to the holidays now, and then we'll have a good time together. She gave her sister a little squeeze, and then sent her off to her preparation. Left to herself, she faced the Griselle problem once more. She knew that it would take a lot to make the young lady say she was sorry, and yet she had determined to apologize. Griselle must and should. The point was, how was she to be brought to it? She recognized the truth of Joey's statement that Griselle hadn't anyone much. In some ways, she was more to be pitied than Juliet. From all accounts, the latter had been accustomed to little different treatments from what she had received, but Griselle for 5 years of her life had been the spoilt darling of her grandmother. The next few years she had a hard discipline for a willful, petted child, and apparently too much freedom from such discipline had gone to Griselle's head. Nothing else could explain her present defiance. Later in the day she went to see Griselle again, but found her stonily silent and absolutely unrepentant. The interview did not go good, and left the girl with a helpless feeling that something was all wrong here. Griselle herself was too miserably angry to care what happened. I hate her, I hate them all, she thought to herself. I'd run away if I had any place to run to. She leant her forehead against the edge of the window frame, staring miserably at the dark pine woods and the slopes of the Barnbald Alm. Presently she shifted her position so that she could look up the long valley towards the Mondenschenspitz, with the Bernkopf in the distance, and towering over all, the Turnjock with its sinister shadows. Even on a summer's day, when the other peaks gleamed white in the glory of the afternoon sun, it looked dark and lowering. Her mind went back to the stories Herr Minch had told her, how one winter 60 years ago there had been a fearful avalanche down its slopes, which had partly buried a little hamlet that stood at the foot of it, and how when spring had brought the thaw and the snow had melted, the houses were so buried in rocks and earth that it had been well nigh impossible to dig them out. There were other gruesome stories, too, of travelers who had been caught in the treacherous mists on its slopes and had never been seen again, or else had been found a little heap of broken bones at the bottom of the ravine, which made one of its chief dangers. As she stood looking dreamily in the distance, she heard footsteps under the window, and then Wanda's precise English. "Where is Grizel, Margia? I should like with her to speak." "Grizel's in a row," replied Margia's voice. "She's vaselined the blackboards and was awfully rude to Madame about it, so she's now to be punished." "Oh, I'm so sorry," said Wanda. "Poor Grizel! How unhappy she must feel at having been rude. But how did she dare? Goodness knows she dares anything. She's going to climb that old turnjock some day, she says," floated up Margia's clear tones. "Oh, but I do not think she can mean that," replied the young Viennese. "That is only talking, as Joey says." They moved on then, but the mischief had been done. So that was what they thought, was it? That was all talk on her part. Well, she would jolly well show them. She would show them that very day. No, the next day. She would get up early, and when they came to find her, she would be gone. She'd show them all what she dared to do, and what she daren't. She'd make them very sorry they'd treated her like this. Miss Maynard entered at the moment to tell her to get ready for a walk, and she had to change her shoes and find her hat. Throughout the half-hour during which they went round the lower of the lake to the Bracau, where they caught the steamer back to the Breslau, she remained obstinately dumb. Miss Maynard made one or two remarks, then, finding her efforts in vain, lapsed into thoughtfulness on her own part, leaving Grizel to herself. When they returned, the young lady was taken back to her room, and Miss Maynard brought her a couple of books and her embroidery before she withdrew, closing the door quietly behind her. There was no question of locking her in. The door was merely shut. Nightly, as she had been, it never dawned on Miss Bettany to think that the girl would abuse the trust reposed in her. And in her normal frame of mind, Grizel would as soon have thought of trying to fly as to betray that trust. But she was not normal at present. The one idea of showing them filled her mind to the exclusion of everything else. It would be an easy matter to get away. She must wake early, by 4 o'clock at latest. That would give her a start of 4 hours, since nobody was likely to come near her much before 8. By that time she hoped to be well on her way to the little alm halfway up the mountain, where herdsmen attended to the cattle which were grazing there in the summer. The question of food was rather a difficulty, for one little shop the place boasted would not be open at that hour, and Grizel knew that bread and cheese was all she was likely to get from the herdsman, and the bread would most likely be reeking of garlic, which she detested. Finally, she decided that she must save all she could from her supper. She hoped they would bring her plenty. She strayed over to the window and stood with her head thrown back, gazing at the great gloomy mountain. Joey Bettany passed beneath, with Simone on her way to tennis, glancing up and saw her, though she did not see Joey. 7:30 brought Marie and her supper. Grizel's spirits went up with a bound as she took in the bowl of soup, the rolls of butter and the large slice of kuchen, and the glass of new milk. The soup and the milk would do for the supper, and the rest she must put away for the morning. Perhaps there would be some apples in the kitchen. Things were going well for her. Later she heard the others coming back from cricket and tennis. Joey was talking. "Look, Appengulk," she said, her words carrying easily in the still air. "Bother," Juliet chimed in. "No games tomorrow. Then it's Saturday." She heard no more, for just then the head came in to say good night, and see that everything she needed was there. Miss Bettany had meant to say something to her, but the hard, defiant look Grizel turned on her forbade anything of the kind. She realized that in the girl's present mood discussion would be worse than usual. "Good night, Grizel," she said quietly. "Good night," mumbled Grizel. Then the door closed and she was alone.